Beaten but unbroken. The alphas claim the rain fell in relentless sheets, drumming against the cold stone walls of the decrepit manor. Inside, the air was thick with fear and resignation, carrying the scent of sweat, blood, and despair. A young Omega, her back marked with bruises like dark, fading ink, crouched in the corner of the dimly lit chamber. Her name was Alara, and though her body bore the weight of cruelty, her spirit, defiant and fragile, refused to bow. Each day in this house was a testament to endurance. Her masters, cruel and unyielding, seemed to find pleasure in breaking her, in reminding her of her helplessness. Yet, even in the moments when her body screamed in protest, when the ache of beaten ribs and raw skin threatened to drown her in despair, she clung to a fragile thread of hope, a belief that life beyond these walls might hold something better. Alara's thoughts wandered as she traced the cracks in the stone floor with trembling fingers. She remembered her mother's lullabies, soft whispers of comfort that seemed like distant echoes now, drowned beneath the roar of cruelty she endured. She remembered the warmth of sunlight on her face before this life of shadows had claimed her days. And she remembered a promise she had made, long ago, to herself: I will survive. No matter what. Outside the manor, the forest loomed like a silent sentinel, dark and endless, hiding secrets and dangers alike. It was said that few dared to venture into its depths, for wolves prowled, and the wind whispered warnings of those who never returned. But even as the fear gripped her heart, Alara dreamed of escape. She dreamed of running through the rain-soaked woods, of tasting freedom that was hers by right, not given. Meanwhile, far from the tormented manor, a different world unfolded. King Aldrich, a widowed Alpha ruler, strode through the grand halls of his palace. His presence commanded respect, his aura of authority as sharp as the ceremonial sword at his side. He carried the weight of his people, a kingdom scarred by loss yet held together by his unwavering will. But beneath the regal composure lay a man shaped by grief, a heart still tender, still mourning the family he had lost. And yet, fate, in its silent, inexorable way, was about to intertwine their lives. Alara did not know that the king, in his travels beyond the palace walls, had begun to hear whispers of a young Omega enduring horrors unimaginable. He did not yet know the defiance that burned quietly in her chest, a fire untouched by fear or pain. And she did not know that her life, so long a chain of suffering, was about to pivot toward a destiny she had never dared to dream. As night fell, shadows deepened around the manor. Alara curled tighter, her mind racing with plans, possibilities, and fear. Somewhere, deep in the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely, haunting sound that seemed to call to her spirit. A shiver ran down her spine, but this time, it was not fear. It was a whisper of hope, fragile yet insistent. Perhaps tomorrow, the world will change. Perhaps tomorrow, I will find freedom. Dawn arrived hesitantly, bleeding pale light across the horizon. The rain had eased to a misty drizzle, leaving the forest glistening with wet leaves, each droplet refracting the timid rays of morning. Alara had spent the night in restless dreams, shadows of her master's cruelty still etched in her mind, mingling with visions of escape that felt both tantalizing and terrifying. By the first light, she was on her feet, muscles aching, skin raw, and heart pounding. She knew the manor's corridors as well as her own pulse, and tonight, that knowledge was the key to survival. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant drop of water from the leaky roof, was a reminder that discovery could spell her doom. Yet, something inside her, a fire that neither blows of the lash nor chains could extinguish, urged her forward. Slipping through the shadows, she moved like a ghost. Her hands found the hidden latch beneath the old tapestry, a door that led to a narrow passageway, forgotten by her cruel masters. The air beyond it was cold, damp, and smelled of earth and decay, but to Alara, it smelled like possibility, like freedom. She didn't hesitate. Each step into the unknown was a step away from pain, a step toward the life she had imagined in secret. Hours passed. The forest closed around her like a living entity, its trees towering, whispering secrets she could barely understand. Rainwater clung to her hair, soaked through her tattered garments, but she barely noticed. Her focus was sharp, her senses heightened. Every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call was a signal. The world was alive, and it was hers to navigate. Meanwhile, in the distant palace, King Aldrich was rising to face his own storm. The reports had come. Rumors of an Omega enduring unimaginable cruelty, wandering the edges of his kingdom. Some called it tragic, others said it was dangerous. But Aldrich felt something he had not in years, a tug at the edges of his mind, a whisper that told him he must see for himself. A sense of duty and instinct, the instincts of an alpha, of a protector, pulled him toward the forest that lay between him and the unknown. The day wore on, and Alara's legs ached, yet she pushed forward, guided by a primal survival instinct. She stumbled at one point, her body failing her, and collapsed against the gnarled roots of a massive tree. Tears mingled with the rain on her cheeks, not just from pain, but from the overwhelming taste of freedom that was finally within Ray. Her chest rose and fell in ragged breaths, yet even as fatigue threatened to claim her, she knew she could not stop. She would not stop. And then, she heard it, a rustle unlike any other, deliberate and measured, accompanied by a soft, commanding growl. Her instincts screamed at her to hide, yet curiosity, that same stubborn flame that had carried her this far, forced her eyes to meet the source. Emerging from the mist, a massive wolf stepped forward. Its eyes, golden and intelligent, locked onto hers. Alara froze, unsure if this creature was a threat or a guardian sent by fate itself. The wolf circled her slowly, sniffing the air. Alara's heart raced, yet oddly, the presence of the beast did not terrify her. It was as though it recognized the fire within her, a soul not broken despite every cruel mark the world had left. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it turned and disappeared into the misty forest, leaving a single thought in her mind: you are not alone. Hours later, Aldrich rode through the same forest, his mount moving swiftly yet cautiously. He could feel the presence of someone, something, in the shadows. His instincts, honed by years of ruling and surviving, guided him. The air smelled of wet earth, of life teetering on the edge, and beneath it, he sensed the faint pulse of fear, yet also of determination. A presence unlike any he had encountered before, fragile but unyielding. And then, in a small clearing, their paths crossed. Alara, crouched beneath the skeletal branches of an ancient oak, saw the Alpha for the first time. He was magnificent, commanding, yet there was a softness in his gaze that contrasted with the harshness of his appearance. And for a moment, neither spoke. Words seemed unnecessary. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. She knew, with a sudden, startling certainty, that her life was about to change forever. And he, standing tall, the wind tugging at his dark hair and cloak, sensed it too, that this Omega, small and battered though she might appear, carried within her a spark no cruelty could ever extinguish. The rain had stopped, leaving the world wet and glistening, a world cleansed and new. And in that moment, Alara realized something she had never dared to hope. Freedom was not just an escape. Freedom could be given, even protected, by one who saw her for who she truly was. The Alpha and the Omega stood across from each other in the clearing, two lives poised to intertwine. The storm behind them had passed, but the storm ahead, the journey of trust, healing, and love, was only just beginning. The forest was silent now, holding the echoes of rain and the distant murmur of streams like a fragile lullaby. Alara's chest heaved, her body aching from the night's flight, yet her eyes remained fixed on the Alpha. Before her, King Aldrich stood there, a figure of strength and command, yet the tension in his gaze revealed something softer, something searching. It was as though he could see beyond the grime, the bruises, the tattered garments, to the heart that had endured more than most could imagine. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, to demand freedom, but the words caught in her throat. Fear had long since become her companion, but now there was something new, curiosity. And underneath that, a fragile, shimmering thread of hope. Could this Alpha, the one whose presence was as imposing as it was comforting, be different? Could he be the one to save her from the darkness that had become her world? Aldrich approached slowly, his steps measured, careful not to startle her. "You're hurt," he said, his voice low, not commanding but observant, almost gentle. "You shouldn't be out here alone." Alara shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Alone?" she whispered. "I've been alone my entire life. What difference does it make if I stay lost in the woods?" A flicker of something, empathy, concern, passed through his eyes. "Alone doesn't have to mean helpless," he said. "Come with me. I can protect you. I can give you shelter." Her heart skipped at the words. Shelter. Protection. These were concepts she had only dared imagine in fleeting dreams, whispered to herself in the dark when the pain became unbearable. And yet, something in his presence, in the steady assurance of his gaze, made her want to believe. Slowly, cautiously, she allowed him to guide her through the forest. Every step was a mixture of hope and fear. The trees seemed to close around them, as if guarding the fragile trust being formed, and the air was heavy with the scent of rain and earth. She noticed the way he moved, purposeful, unyielding, yet attuned to her pace. It was as though he had already made a vow, unspoken, to keep her safe. Hours later, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson, the silhouette of the palace appeared through the mist. It rose like a beacon of promise above the surrounding lands, its spires glinting in the fading light. Alara's breath caught. She had seen grandeur before, but never like this, never as a place where safety and authority could coexist so completely. And yet, she hesitated at the gates, memories of cruelty flashing through her mind. Could she really step into a life where kindness existed without strings? Aldrich noticed her hesitation. I won't force you, he said softly. But I will not abandon you either. This palace, it can be your sanctuary, if you let it. Something inside her, the part that had survived every beating, every insult, every lonely night, stirred. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. A decision had been made. She would step forward, into the unknown, trusting that this alpha's claim over her life would not be one of oppression but of protection. The gates opened and the palace welcomed them, not as a prison, but as a place of refuge. Servants peeked curiously from behind doors and pillars, whispering among themselves at the sight of the ragged Omega escorted by the king himself. Aldrich's presence silenced them. Authority radiated from him in waves, calming the whispers before they could fully form. He guided her to a small chamber, simple yet elegant, with soft linens, warm hearth, and a window that looked out over the gardens. Rest, he instructed, eat something. The world can wait for a moment while you regain your strength. Alara sank to the bed, her body trembling from exhaustion and the sudden relief of safety. For the first time in her life, she did not feel watched, judged, or threatened. The walls did not close in. The shadows did not clutch at her. And though the bruises and scars would remain, for the first time, she felt a strange sensation bubbling inside her, peace. As Aldrich left the room, closing the door softly behind him, she allowed herself to close her eyes. Dreams of flight through the forest mingled with images of a life she had never dared imagine, a life where someone could care for her, where kindness was not a weapon, and where the darkness of her past could gradually be healed by light. Outside, the palace hummed with quiet activity, yet inside that small chamber, time seemed to slow. The journey had only begun, but a new chapter in Alara's life was unfolding. A chapter filled not with fear, but with the fragile, luminous hope of love, trust, and the promise of healing. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps she could be more than broken. Perhaps she could be whole. And Aldrich, walking through the halls of his palace, felt it too. A quiet certainty that this Omega, battered yet unbroken, would change everything about his life, and that in claiming her, he would find a part of himself he thought lost forever. The storm of the past had passed. The storm of the heart, and the bond between Alpha and Omega, was only just beginning. The morning light spilled gently into Alara's chamber, painting the walls with a soft warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold, cruel darkness she had fled. For the first time in years, she awoke not to pain, not to the echo of harsh voices, but to quiet. The air smelled faintly of the palace gardens, fresh herbs, blooming flowers, and the soft scent of rain lingering from the previous day. Her body ached, every muscle stiff from the journey and the bruises she carried like reminders of her past. Yet, beneath the fatigue, a strange sense of anticipation stirred. The palace was vast, more grand than she had ever imagined, yet it was not intimidating. It was alive, filled with unseen eyes that observed with curiosity rather than cruelty. And somewhere in its halls, King Aldrich moved, a figure whose presence promised both protection and uncertainty, whose quiet authority carried an unspoken challenge. Could she trust him? She rose slowly, careful not to strain the raw edges of her skin. Every movement reminded her of the life she had endured, of the nights curled in corners, trembling and aching, praying for a world that had never come. But here, in this chamber, there were no lashes, no shouts, no chains. The only sound was the faint trickle of water from a nearby fountain and the whisper of wind against the windows. A knock came at the door, soft and tentative. "Alara?" The voice was calm, measured, yet filled with concern. She froze for a heartbeat, unsure if she was ready to face anyone. Then she recognized it, Aldrich. "Come in," she managed, her voice low, cautious. He entered quietly, his tall frame filling the doorway without overwhelming it. His eyes, dark and observant, softened as he took in her weary figure. "How are you feeling?" he asked, not as a ruler to a subject, but as someone who genuinely cared. Alara hesitated. Words were difficult, trust even more so. I'm alive," she whispered, the smallest of truths. Alive was more than a statement, it was a defiance, a victory over the cruelty that had nearly broken her. Aldrich nodded slowly. "Alive is the first step," he said gently. "The next steps will be harder, but you don't have to face them alone." The chamber door opened wider as a servant entered, carrying a tray of warm food and a jug of water. Alara's stomach protested, reminding her that hunger had become a constant companion during her time in the manor. She ate slowly, savoring the taste of warmth and sustenance, the simplest things she had long been denied. As the day wore on, Aldrich guided her through the palace. He showed her the gardens, the libraries, and the quiet courtyards where no eyes judged her, where no whispers carried malice. Every step was measured, every gesture patient. He did not force her to speak of the past, did not demand gratitude or obedience. He simply allowed her to exist, to breathe, to begin understanding what it meant to be safe. Yet, even in this sanctuary, shadows lingered. Memories clawed at her mind, sudden flashes of abuse, whispers of mockery, and the weight of years spent surviving. At times, she flinched at the slightest movement, bristled at the faintest tone of command. Aldrich noticed each reaction, each tremor, yet never pressed. He waited, understanding that trust could not be demanded, only earned. That evening, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting long shadows across the palace halls, Aldrich found her alone in the garden. She was seated beneath an ancient oak, hands clasped around her knees, staring at the stars beginning to emerge. "The night is beautiful," he said quietly, sitting beside her without crowding her space. Alara glanced at him, uncertainty flickering in her gaze. "I've never seen the night like this," she admitted. "It's peaceful." "It is," he agreed. "And it can be yours, Alara. Peace doesn't come to everyone, but you deserve it. I won't let anyone take it from you." A strange warmth pooled in her chest. Words like these had never been spoken to her with sincerity. She wanted to believe, yet the walls around her heart had been built over years of pain, each brick forged from betrayal, fear, and suffering. But the alpha beside her, strong yet gentle, patient yet unwavering, made her wonder if those walls could ever fall. Why help me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "You don't even know me." Aldrich's gaze met hers, steady, unwavering. "I know enough," he said simply. "I know strength when I see it. And I know the difference between fear and courage. You are courageous, Alara, even if you don't see it yet." For the first time in her life, someone had truly seen her, not the beaten, broken Omega, but the woman who had survived against all odds, the soul that had endured every cruelty and remained unbroken. The night deepened, and the palace around them seemed to exhale a quiet serenity. Alara leaned back against the tree, allowing herself to listen to the whispers of the wind, to the distant call of night birds, to the steady presence of Aldrich beside her. For the first time, she realized that safety was not just a concept, not just a place, it was a feeling, one that could be shared, one that could be claimed. And as the stars twinkled above, she dared to imagine something she had long thought impossible. A life where she was not merely surviving, but living. A life where trust could exist. A life where love, perhaps, could bloom from the ashes of pain. The journey was only beginning. The palace walls were grand, but the walls around her heart were taller. And yet, in the presence of the Alpha who had claimed her, not as a prisoner, but as a soul to protect, Alara felt a stirring of something powerful and undeniable. Hope. Hope that she could heal. Hope that she could belong. Hope that, for the first time in her life, she could be unbroken. Days passed in quiet, measured rhythms, each one peeling away a layer of fear and hesitation from Alara. The palace, once an alien and intimidating place, had begun to feel like a haven. The walls were high and ornate, yet inside them, she discovered spaces that encouraged her to breathe, to wander, to east without the oppressive weight of cruelty pressing down on her. Aldrich continued to watch over her with a careful balance of authority and gentleness. He never demanded more than she could give, never pushed her beyond her limits, and yet, in his presence, there was a subtle command, a silent insistence that she rise above her past, that she see herself as more than a victim. One morning, he led her to the palace gardens, vast and sprawling, a mosaic of flowers, fountains, and quiet walkways. The dew clung to every petal, shimmering like scattered gems in the pale sunlight. Alara inhaled deeply, savoring the pure air and the scent of blossoms she had never known. Her fingers brushed over the petals of a crimson rose, delicate yet resilient, and for a moment, she felt an uncanny parallel to her own existence. She, too, was fragile yet unbroken. Aldrich stood beside her, silent, his dark eyes scanning the horizon as if guarding not just the palace but the fragile peace that had settled over her. Finally, he spoke. The world outside these walls is harsh, Alara. You've known that more than anyone. But here, you can choose to grow, to rebuild what's been broken. She looked up at him, the question burning in her gaze. Why me? Why care? I've seen too much suffering in my life, he replied quietly, and I cannot turn away when someone still fights despite it. You fight, even when the world has tried to break you. That is why I care. His words struck a chord deep within her. She had never been recognized for her strength, never praised for enduring, never even acknowledged beyond the pain she carried. And yet, here was someone, an alpha, a king, a man of power, seeing her not for what had been done to her, but for what she had endured. Alara spent the next hours wandering the gardens alone, allowing herself to feel the strange sensation of normalcy. She watched birds flit between trees, their wings catching the sunlight. She listened to the soft babble of fountains. Each moment, though simple, felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of a life that had once been stolen from her. Later, Aldrich found her beneath a pergola, vines heavy with blossoms cascading around her. She had begun sketching the garden in the small notebook she had found among the palace supplies, an attempt to capture beauty in a world that had long seemed devoid of it. You have an eye for detail, Aldrich remarked, his voice quiet but admiring. She looked up, startled. I never had time for beauty before, she admitted. Only survival. He nodded, understanding. And yet, despite all that, you see it. That is a gift, Alara. Even in darkness, you notice the light. For the first time, she allowed herself to smile, not a cautious, fleeting smile, but one that lingered. The walls her heart were still there, but small cracks had begun to form, letting in warmth, trust, and a sense of possibility. Days turned into weeks. Alara began learning the rhythms of palace life, when meals were served, which corridors led to quiet corners, how the staff moved through their duties. She still flinched at sudden movements or harsh words, but Aldrich's patience was unwavering. He never scolded her for hesitation, never demanded obedience beyond her comfort. Slowly, she began to trust, not just in him, but in herself, in her ability to navigate this new world. One evening, as the sun dipped into shades of gold and crimson, Aldrich approached her in the library. The room was quiet, filled with the scent of old parchment and polished wood. Shelves towered above them, stacked with knowledge and history. You've been spending a lot of time here, he observed. I like it, she admitted. Books, they tell stories. They remind me that the world is bigger than the walls I knew. He smiled faintly. Stories can teach us many things, strength, patience, courage. And sometimes, they remind us that even the smallest voice can shape destiny. Alara looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt seen. She felt valued. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a quiet acknowledgement that their bond was growing, built not on fear or dominance, but on respect, understanding, and a shared recognition of each other's strength. That night, as she lay in her chamber, listening to the distant hum of the palace, she allowed herself a thought she had never dared. Maybe I can be happy. Maybe I can belong. Maybe I am more than what they made me believe. And somewhere in the quiet corridors of the palace, Aldrich walked alone, thinking of the Omega who had survived storms no one else could endure. He knew their journey was far from over, but he also knew one truth that would guide them both. They had found each other, and together, they could face the storms that still lay ahead. The past was a shadow. The palace was a sanctuary. And the bond between Alpha and Omega, fragile yet unyielding, was beginning to write a new story, one not of fear, but of trust, healing, and the slow, steady bloom of hope. The palace, for all its grandeur and sanctuary, was not immune to the outside world. Rumors traveled faster than the wind, whispers carried from village to village, and even the quietest courtyards could not shield them from the shadows lurking beyond the kingdom's borders. For Alara, whose life had been a relentless struggle against cruelty and oppression, the threat of danger was not a concept, it was an instinct embedded deep in her bones. It was on a morning heavy with fog that the first stirrings of unrest reached the palace gate. Scouts returned from the outskirts with reports of rogue factions moving through the forests, men and women who preyed upon the weak and sought to exploit any signs of vulnerability. Aldrich received the news in his private chamber, brow furrowed, eyes dark with concern. Alara, noticing the tension in the Alpha's posture, approached him hesitantly. Is it dangerous?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the habit of bracing herself for bad news. Aldrich turned, his expression softening at the sight of her worry. "It can be," he admitted. "But danger doesn't come to those who are prepared. And I will not let harm touch you, not while I can prevent it." She felt a mixture of awe and something unfamiliar, a warmth that came from being truly protected. Her past had taught her that promises were fragile, that words meant little in the face of action. Yet Aldrich's stance, unwavering and deliberate, reassured her in a way she had never experienced before. As the day progressed, the tension in the palace grew. Guards patrolled the perimeter with sharpened senses, and Aldrich moved among them with a calculated authority, preparing for any possible intrusion. Alara, initially anxious at the heightened activity, found herself observing the discipline and organization of the palace, a stark contrast to the chaos and fear she had once known. That evening, Aldrich invited her to dine in the grand hall. The candles flickered, casting dancing shadows against the walls lined with tapestries depicting generations of rulers and battles fought. For Alara, the hall was both beautiful and intimidating, but Aldrich's presence beside her made the vastness of the space feel smaller, safer. "They're unpredictable," he said quietly, referring to the rogue factions. "But strength is not just in the sword or muscle, it's in strategy, patience, and the courage to act when the moment comes. You have that courage, Alara. I've seen it." Her chest tightened at his words. Courage. It was a word she had long ago stopped associating with herself. Yet hearing it from him, the Alpha who had claimed her trust, sparked a strange determination within her. Perhaps she was stronger than she believed. Perhaps survival was only the first step toward truly living. Night fell, and the palace settled into an uneasy quiet. Alara, unable to sleep, wandered the halls, thoughts tangled between fear and anticipation. She paused near the balcony, gazing out at the mist-shrouded forest. The shadows seemed darker than before, filled with unseen threats, yet she felt something she had not felt in years: readiness. Not just to run, not just to survive, but to stand, to face what came with Aldrich at her side. A sudden commotion in the courtyard drew her attention. Figures moved in T. He missed, shadows darting past torches. Her heart raced, instinct propelling her toward the source. Aldrich met her there, calm and composed, yet every muscle in his body radiating controlled power. "They've come sooner than expected," he murmured, scanning the scene. "Stay behind me." Alara hesitated only for a moment before following his command, trusting the Alpha implicitly. She had learned that survival was no longer just about fleeing, sometimes it was about standing firm, about facing danger with courage and clarity. And in Aldrich's presence, the fear that had once dominated her every waking moment was tempered by resolve. The night unfolded with tense anticipation. Guards moved with precision, their swords catching the flickering torchlight, while Aldrich's voice carried commands that were calm yet absolute. Alara watched, absorbing every detail, every strategic choice, realizing that the palace was not just a sanctuary, It was a fortress, and she was part of its defense, even if only as an observer. When the threat finally dissipated, leaving only the quiet rustle of wind through trees, Alara felt a surge of something unexpected: pride. Not in herself alone, but in the bond she had begun to share with Aldrich. He had not only shielded her from harm but had allowed her to witness the power of courage, strategy, and unyielding resolve. As they returned to the warmth of the palace, Aldrich placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You see," he said softly, "even the world's storms cannot touch you when we stand together. And together, we will face whatever comes next." Alara nodded, the walls around her heart shifting ever so slightly. Danger still lingered beyond the palace, but for the first time, she realized that she was not alone, that strength could be shared, and that even in a world shaped by cruelty and fear, she could carve a place of safety, trust, and, perhaps eventually, love. The night deepened, carrying with it the silent promise of a bond forged not in chains or fear, but in trust, courage, and the slow, steady bloom of resilience. And as she lay in her chamber, listening to the soft hum of the palace, Alara allowed herself a thought that had once seemed impossible. I am no longer just surviving. I am learning to live. The days following the skirmish at the palace gates were heavy with reflection. Alara had witnessed the Alpha's strength, not just in combat, but in strategy, in his calm command of chaos, in the unwavering presence that shielded her from harm. And yet, as much as she admired him, there remained a quiet tension within her. Trust did not come easily. Every instinct screamed caution, every scar a reminder that the world could turn cruel at any moment. Aldrich, perceptive as ever, noticed the subtle hesitation in her movements. The slight flinch when someone brushed past her or raised a voice. He did not press her, did not demand openness. Instead, he allowed her space, a silent acknowledgement that trust could only grow on its own, nurtured gently, never forced. One afternoon, he found her in the palace courtyard, seated by the fountain where the water danced in sunlight like liquid crystal. She traced her fingers through the ripples, lost in thought. Aldrich approached quietly, his presence near but not imposing. "Do you ever wonder," he began, his tone thoughtful, "why the world places so many burdens on some and none on others?" Alara looked up, surprised by the sudden philosophical turn. "I've wondered that my whole life," she admitted softly. "But I've stopped asking. Life doesn't answer. It just gives and takes." He nodded, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Maybe," he said carefully, "but the world also gives unexpected gifts. You've survived horrors most cannot imagine, Alara. And yet, here you are, alive, unbroken. That is no small feat." Her lips parted slightly, as if to respond, but no words came. It was not anger, nor fear, that held her silent, but awe. Here was an Alpha, a king, acknowledging her strength, not as pity, not as obligation, but as truth. For the first time, she felt seen, not merely as a survivor, but as someone capable of shaping her own destiny. Days turned into weeks, and their interactions, once cautious and formal, began to deepen. Aldrich shared fragments of his past, the grief of losing a mate, the burden of leadership, the weight of responsibility that often left him restless at night. Alara listened, sometimes surprised by the vulnerability behind his commanding presence. She had assumed power was only rigid and unyielding, yet here it was tempered by compassion and understanding. In turn, she began to share pieces of herself, not the raw wounds of her past, not all at once, but small glimpses of who she was beyond fear. A sketch she had drawn of the forest, a story from her childhood, a memory of her mother's lullabies. Each fragment was like a thread, weaving a tapestry of connection between them, fragile yet growing stronger with every passing day. One evening, under the glow of the moon, Aldrich invited her to walk the palace gardens. The air was crisp, fragrant with blooms that had resisted the recent storm. They moved together in silence, comfortable in each other's presence. Finally, Aldrich stopped beneath an ancient oak, its branches stretched like arms toward the sky. "Do you trust me, Alara?" he asked softly, his gaze steady. Her heart thumped, caught between fear and hope. I want to," she admitted. "But trust has been hard for me. Harder than I ever imagined." He nodded, taking a careful step closer. "I understand, and I will not rush you. But know this, my claim on you is not one of ownership. It is of protection, of care, of a bond forged not by fear, but by choice. You are not alone anymore. Her chest swelled with a quiet warmth, tears threatening to spill. She had spent years in darkness, believing herself undeserving of kindness, undeserving of love. And yet, here was someone offering both freely, without expectation or judgment. Slowly, she reached out, her hand brushing his. It was tentative, almost reverent, but it carried a message words could not convey. I am beginning to believe. Aldrich's hand closed over hers, strong yet gentle. Good, he whispered, because I will not let anything harm you. Not now, not ever. The weeks that followed were filled with subtle growth. Alara's confidence grew, not only in the safety of the palace, but in herself. She practiced with the guards, learning simple defense techniques, discovering that her strength lay not just in survival but in the ability to act decisively. Aldrich observed, sometimes guiding, sometimes letting her find her own way, always reinforcing the truth she was beginning to internalize: she was capable, resilient, and worthy of protection and love. And yet, with every triumph, there was still the whisper of fear. The rogue factions had not vanished, and the world beyond the palace walls remained unpredictable. But for the first time, Alara realized that fear was no longer her master. Courage, resilience, and trust could guide her, and she had Aldrich beside her. That night, as she lay in her chamber, listening to the soft hum of the palace, she allowed herself a quiet hope. The past had been cruel, yes, but it did not define her future. She was no longer the beaten, powerless Omega of yesterday. She was learning to claim her life, her strength, her heart, and the Alpha who had recognized her worth was walking beside her every step of the way. In the stillness, she whispered to herself, I am unbroken. I am alive, and I will no longer be afraid. And somewhere in the palace corridors, Aldrich watched over her with silent pride, knowing that the bond between them, once tentative and fragile, was now solidifying into something unshakable, a connection forged in trust, courage, and the quiet power of hearts learning to heal together. The calm of the palace had lasted only so long. For all its grandeur and fortitude, the world beyond the walls remained unpredictable, and no sanctuary, no matter how imposing, could completely shield its inhabitants from danger. It began as a quiet unease. The scouts' reports had become more frequent, detailing movement in the forests, small groups of rogues testing the borders, probing for weaknesses. Aldrich remained composed, yet the sharp edge of concern never left his gaze. Every decision, every command he gave, was calculated with precision, ensuring that the palace remained a fortress while protecting those within its walls, especially Alara. For her part, Alara could feel the tension in the air. Though she had grown stronger, more confident, and had begun to embrace a sense of belonging, instinct whispered caution. The scars of her past made it impossible to ignore danger, and yet, under Aldrich's guidance, she had begun to understand that courage was not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. One evening, as dusk painted the palace gardens in muted oranges and golds, a sudden cry echoed from the outer gates. Alara's pulse quickened, a familiar rush of adrenaline filling her veins. Aldrich's eyes, sharp and commanding, immediately scanned the horizon. Stay behind me, he instructed, voice calm but carrying an authority that brooked no argument. The sight that met them at the gates was both chaotic and deliberate. A band of rogues, their faces masked and weapons gleaming, had infiltrated the outer perimeter, testing the palace defenses. Guards rushed forward, torches and steel in hand, but it was Aldrich who moved with the precision of a predator. His presence was magnetic, commanding, and terrifying all at once. Alara, watching from behind him, felt fear claw at her chest, but alongside it was something new: determination. She would not be paralyzed. She would not run blindly. She had survived horrors far greater than this. And with Aldrich, she felt a courage she had never known she could possess. The battle that followed was swift and calculated. Aldrich's voice rang out, cutting through the chaos, issuing commands that were executed with perfect timing. He moved with lethal grace, intercepting threats before they could reach the palace interior. Alara, guided by his presence, found herself assisting where she could, alerting guards to hidden dangers, closing gates, and even using the defensive training he had begun to teach her. In the midst of the chaos, a rogue broke through the lines, approaching her with a weapon raised. Her instincts screamed to flee, yet the trust she had begun to place in herself and in Aldrich anchored her in place. Before she could act, Aldrich appeared, his form a shield between her and the danger. With a swift motion, he disarmed the intruder, his eyes locking onto hers for a moment. "You're safe," he said firmly, the words carrying more than reassurance, they carried a promise. The threat was neutralized, the rogues retreating into the shadows from whence they came. The palace, though scarred in that brief moment of conflict, remained intact, its walls holding firm. And in the aftermath, as the adrenaline ebbed and the guards returned to their posts, a profound silence settled. Over the courtyard, Alara turned to Aldrich, her chest heaving from the rush of fear and relief. I thought I'd be helpless," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I wasn't. I helped." He studied her, eyes dark and intense, yet softened by pride. "You did. And that is the courage I knew you had. You are stronger than you realize, Alara. Never forget that." For the first time, she felt the weight of her past lift slightly, not entirely, for scars do not fade quickly, but enough to allow a sense of achievement, of self-respect, and of belonging. She had faced danger, not as a victim, but as a participant. She had survived not only because of Aldrich, but because of the strength she had cultivated within herself. That night, the palace settled into quiet once more. Alara stood by the balcony, gazing at the moonlit forest beyond. The danger had been real, yet it had also been a revelation. She could trust Aldrich, yes, but more importantly, she could trust herself. The Alpha's protection was a shield, but her courage was her own sword. Aldrich approached, silent and steady, standing beside her without needing to speak. For a long while, they watched the night together, two souls bound not by fear, but by trust, respect, and a connection that had been forged through trials both external and internal. "Tonight was," she began, searching for words, "proof that I can survive. Not just with you, but because of myself." He nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "And I will be here, always, to remind you of that. The world may test us, Alara, but together, we are stronger than any storm, any threat." She let the words sink in, feeling them resonate deep within her. The rogue threat had passed, but the true victory was more profound. The realization that fear did not define her, that courage did, and that the bond she shared with Aldrich was no longer tentative, it was unshakable. The night stretched on, peaceful now, a quiet testament to resilience, trust, and the first hints of love growing between the Alpha and the Omega. The palace, scarred but secure, had become not only a fortress of stone but a sanctuary of hearts, two hearts learning, slowly, that even amidst danger, hope could thrive, courage could blossom, and love could take root in the most unexpected of places. The palace, once a place of quiet refuge, now hummed with a subtle energy, one born not of fear or caution, but of connection in the slow, deliberate weaving of trust. Alara had grown stronger, more confident in her movements, more assured in her decisions, yet there remained a fragile tension in her heart. She had learned to survive, to fight, to trust Aldrich, but there was another lesson she had not yet mastered: how to allow herself to feel. It was a morning bathed in sunlight, golden rays spilling into the gardens and illuminating every petal and leaf. Alara wandered the pathways alone, her fingers brushing the blooms she had come to cherish. The world felt alive, vibrant, and yet she could not shake the nervous anticipation curling in her chest. Something unspoken lingered between her and Aldrich, a quiet electricity she could not ignore. He found her there, as if drawn by the same invisible thread. His presence, commanding yet gentle, made the air feel different, charged, alive, expectant. "You've changed," he remarked softly, stepping closer. "More than you realize." Alara looked up, startled by the truth in his words. I think I am," she admitted. Because of you." Aldrich's gaze softened, dark eyes glimmering with something beyond authority or protection. "Because of me?" he repeated, not as a question but as a gentle echo, allowing her words to settle between them. "Yes," she whispered. You made me feel safe. You made me believe I can survive, not just endure. You've shown me I can be more than what they tried to make me." The Alpha stepped closer, the space between them charged yet respectful. "Alara," he said, voice low and deliberate, "you've always been more. I only gave you the chance to see it for yourself. You are strong, unbroken, and capable of more than you know. And I? His words faltered, the weight of unspoken emotions pressing against him. Alara's heart thudded. She had felt the unspoken bond between them growing stronger with every shared glance, every quiet moment, every trial faced together. And now, standing beneath the sunlight filtering through the trees, she felt the undeniable pull of something deeper, a connection forged not in fear, not in obligation, but in shared survival, mutual respect, and the subtle bloom of affection. He reached out, tentatively, placing a hand near hers. The gesture was simple, yet it carried a depth of emotion that words could not capture. Alara, hesitant for only a heartbeat, allowed herself to close the gap, their hands brushing, fingers intertwining in a delicate, fragile acknowledgement of their bond. Fear has ruled much of your life, Aldrich murmured, his thumb brushing lightly across her knuckles. But you are learning to face it, to rise above it. And in doing so, you are teaching me as well. Alara's chest tightened, a rush of warmth flooding through her. For years, she had believed herself unworthy of care, unworthy of love. And yet, here was the alpha who had claimed her trust, not through dominance or coercion, but through unwavering patience and understanding, showing her that she was deserving. I don't know how to, she began, words faltering under the weight of her emotions. You don't need to know, he said softly. You only need to feel. The afternoon passed in quiet companionship. They walked through the gardens, side by side, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent, the unspoken understanding between them growing with every step. Aldrich did not rush her, did not demand more than she was ready to give. And Alara, for the first time in her life, allowed herself to be seen fully, not just as a survivor, but as a woman capable of feeling, capable of love. As dusk fell, painting the sky in hues of crimson and violet, Aldrich led her to a secluded balcony overlooking the forest. The wind tugged gently at their garments, and the world seemed suspended between day and night. He turned to her, his expression earnest and unwavering. Alara, he said, I claim you, not as a prisoner, not as someone beneath me, but as someone I care for deeply. You are mine, and I am yours, in every way that matters. Tears welled in her eyes, a mixture of relief, joy, and overwhelming gratitude. She had endured so much, fought so long to survive, and now, for the first time, she could embrace the possibility of love without fear. And I am yours, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Aldrich's hand reached up to gently cup her face, his touch both commanding and tender. The distance between them closed, and in the quiet of the evening, they allowed themselves the first full acknowledgement of the bond that had been growing since the day he found her in the forest. The world beyond the palace walls might still hold danger. The shadows of the past might still linger in quiet corners. But in this moment, beneath the twilight sky, Alara and Aldrich discovered a truth stronger than fear, stronger than pain, and more enduring than any obstacle. They belonged to each other, unbroken and unyielding, heart to heart. And in the soft, lingering silence, as the first stars began to twinkle above, they embraced, not just as Alpha and Omega, but as two souls who had found in each other the sanctuary, trust, and love they had long been denied. The first light of dawn crept gently over the horizon, painting the palace walls in soft golds and pinks. For the first time in years, Alara awoke without the shadow of fear pressing down on her chest. The cold, cruel weight of her past had not vanished entirely, it never would, but it no longer defined her. She stretched beneath the warm linens, feeling the lingering ache of bruises fading, and allowed herself a quiet, unhurried breath. Aldrich's presence was near, calm and steady as always. He had spent the night keeping watch, a silent guardian not just of her safety, but of her heart. Alara turned to see him leaning against the doorway, his dark hair catching the morning light, eyes soft yet commanding. The Alpha who had once seemed untouchable now looked like a man wholly present. Wholly devoted, and wholly hers. Good morning, he said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that made her chest flutter. Alara smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. Morning, she replied. It feels different today. He stepped closer, his presence reassuring, comforting. It should, he murmured. Because today is not just any day. Today marks the beginning of everything we've fought to reach, the life we've earned together. Outside the palace, the world began to stir, the forest alive with birdsong, the gardens shimmering with dew. But inside, the palace was calm, a sanctuary where trust had blossomed into something far more profound: love. Alara rose and met Aldrich's gaze, feeling a quiet courage settle in her chest. The fear that had haunted her for so long was no longer a chain, it was a reminder of the strength she had forged through hardship, and of the man who had walked beside her every step of the way. Are we ready?" she asked, voice trembling slightly with anticipation. Aldrich took her hand, enveloping it in his larger, warmer one. "We are," he said firmly. "We've faced the storms, the darkness, the past that tried to break us. And now, we step into a future of our choosing. Together." The day unfolded like a dream. In the grand hall, the palace staff gathered to witness a moment long anticipated, not a ceremony of obligation, but a celebration of two souls finally finding their place with one another. Alara walked beside Aldrich, her hand in his, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her palm. Every step was deliberate, every glance shared a silent vow. They would face the world together, unbroken and unafraid. As the sun climbed higher, casting light into every shadowed corner, Aldrich turned to Alara. "From this day forward, you are not merely my Omega," he said, voice steady and filled with conviction. "You are my equal, my partner, my heart. Whatever comes, we face it side by side." Alara's eyes glistened with tears, tears of relief, gratitude, and uncontainable joy. "And you are mine," she whispered. "Not because I am afraid or because I must, but because I choose you. Always." Aldrich pulled her into a tender embrace, their foreheads resting together, breath mingling, hearts aligned. The palace, once a place of shadows and whispers, now rang with the quiet, unshakable truth of their bond. The walls had witnessed suffering, survival, and now, love. Pure, unyielding, and bright. The rest of the day passed in a blissful serenity. They walked through the gardens hand in hand, sharing quiet laughter and stolen glances. Alara explored every corner of the palace she had once feared, seeing it now as a place of belonging rather than confinement. Guards, servants, and friends of the kingdom looked on with admiration, noting the transformation not only of the palace but of the Omega who had survived so much and now radiated strength, courage, and confidence. As twilight descended, painting the sky in shades of rose and violet, Aldrich led Alara to the highest tower. From there, they could see the kingdom stretched out before them, a tapestry of life and possibility. He turned to her, eyes glimmering with affection and pride. "This is our world," he said softly. "The one we've fought for, the one we've earned. And it will be ours to shape, together." Alara leaned into him, feeling the steady warmth of his chest beneath her cheek. "Together," she echoed. In that quiet, sacred space, the Alpha and Omega stood united, hearts intertwined, past wounds acknowledged but no longer defining them. The storms of the past had tested them, shaping them, but love had prevailed, gentle, patient, and steadfast. As night fell, stars glittering above like scattered diamonds, they watched in companionable silence, knowing that the world outside could never break what they had forged within. Alara, once beaten and afraid, was no longer a prisoner of her past. Aldrich, once a solitary king, was no longer alone. And as they embraced beneath the endless sky, a shared thought passed between them, unspoken yet undeniable. They were home, not in a place, but in each other. The palace, the forest, the kingdom, it all mattered less than the truth they had discovered. Love, trust, and courage could heal even the deepest scars. And together, they would walk forward, unbroken, into the dawn of forever. The past was behind them. The present was theirs. And the future, bright, unshakable, and shared, stretched ahead, a promise of happiness, unity, and unending devotion. The morning sun spilled over the palace walls like liquid gold, washing the gardens, the courtyards, and the towers in warmth. For Alara, this day felt different, lighter, freer, and somehow sacred. She woke not to the pounding fear that had haunted her every night, but to a calm certainty. The darkness of her past still lingered in corners of her memory, but it no longer ruled her. She was alive, unbroken, and, more importantly, she belonged. Aldrich was already awake, standing by the balcony where the breeze caught his hair, his eyes scanning the horizon with the watchful calm that always seemed to follow him. Yet when he turned and saw her, the sternness in his gaze softened, replaced by a warmth so profound it made her chest ache. "Good morning," he said, voice gentle, low, and tender. "Elric," she murmured, smiling, the sound feeling natural for the first time. "Good morning." He came closer, hands outstretched, steady and reassuring. "Today is the day we celebrate more than survival," he said. "More than victory over the shadows that have chased us. Today, we honor what has grown between us, trust, courage, and a love that neither time nor pain could destroy." Her heart swelled, tears pricking her eyes. She had endured so much cruelty, so many nights of despair, that even now, she could hardly believe this moment was real. But Aldric's presence, his patience, his unwavering claim, not of ownership, but of protection and devotion, made it real. It made her whole. The palace staff, friends of the kingdom, and the guards gathered for the celebration. But it was not a ceremony of tradition or obligation, it was a recognition of triumph. The triumph of two souls who had endured storms, healed together, and emerged stronger. Aldric led her through the grand hall, where sunlight danced through the tall windows, casting patterns on the polished floors. Each step was measured, yet filled with anticipation, carrying the weight of the journey they had shared. Stopping in the center of the hall, Aldric turned to her, dark eyes soft but unwavering. "Alara," he said, voice steady yet full of emotion, "you are no longer the Omega who was beaten and broken. You are fierce, strong, resilient, and unbroken. I claim you, not as one beneath me, but as my equal, my partner, my heart. You are mine, and I am yours, in every way that matters." Her breath caught. For years, she had longed for someone to see her for who she truly was, beyond scars and fear, and now he did. "And I," she whispered, "choose you. Always. Not out of fear or obligation, but because you are my home. My strength. My heart." Aldric reached out, cupping her face, their foreheads touching in quiet reverence. The world outside the palace might still hold dangers, might still bring trials, but here, in this sacred moment, they were untouchable. Together, unbroken and unshakable. The sun rose higher, filling the hall with light as the two of them walked through the gardens hand in hand. Laughter and gentle conversation surrounded them, yet in their bubble of shared trust, nothing else mattered. Alara could see the kingdom, the forests beyond, and feel the life she had reclaimed, one not defined by suffering, but by love, courage, and the choices she had made. That evening, under the glow of the setting sun, Aldric led her to the highest tower. Together, they looked out at the kingdom that stretched before them, a world full of possibilities. The air was soft, scented with blooming flowers, the gentle rustle of leaves a lullaby of peace. "This," he whispered, wrapping his arms around her, "is ours. Every sunrise, every challenge, every quiet moment, ours. And I will spend every day proving that, protecting you, and cherishing you for as long as I live." Alara leaned into him, feeling his steady heartbeat beneath her cheek, the rhythm a comforting echo of the life they would share. "And I," she murmured, "will spend every day loving you, trusting you, and standing with you. We are stronger together than we ever could be apart." The palace, the gardens, the kingdom, they all faded into the background. All that remained was the quiet, enduring truth of their bond. They had faced fear, cruelty, and the shadows of the past, and yet they had emerged unbroken, together, and unstoppable. Under the endless sky, as stars began to twinkle like scattered diamonds, Alara and Aldric embraced, not as Alpha and Omega, but as two hearts who had found in each other sanctuary, courage, and love. The past no longer held dominion over them. The future stretched ahead, bright and unshakable, a promise of happiness, devotion, and a life claimed together. And in that perfect, eternal moment, they understood the truth they had both sought for so long. Love, when patient, fearless, and true, can heal even the deepest scars. And together, unbroken, they would face everything the world dared to bring, hand in hand, heart to heart, forever. The palace was silent now, bathed in moonlight, but inside, two souls radiated warmth, trust, and unyielding love. And for the first time in her life, Alara could finally say it with certainty: she was home. She was free. And she was loved, completely, unconditionally, and forever.